Hi guys, thanks for joining us today. Really cool to be here with Jared Tendler today. We've done a lot of these digital workshops and meetups over the past couple of years, but I've got to say that of all of the ones that we've done, this is the one I'm most excited about, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So thanks for joining us. Anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Kerrin Grosvenor. I work for Betfair in Australia. And I head up our automation function along with Ben and Ivan, who are also here today. We're here to help support our analytical community on the exchange in Australia. So people who are interested in automating what they do, in using the exchange for more sophisticated strategies, for modeling, for trading. That's our focus. Today, we're a little bit outside that focus. So, like I said, we've got Jared here with us. He's a mental game coach, and he specializes in working with athletes, professionals, particularly financial traders, poker players, to help them to manage the role that emotion plays in what they do. And for so much of us who work in this space or play in this space, the role that emotion plays is really relevant. I know that a lot of what Jared does, a lot of his work is really popular in our community. It's something that we've spoken about at length before. We've got several people who are big advocates of his work. And I was incredibly excited when Jared agreed to come and have some targeted workshops, these sessions, that have been tailored for our community and our community's needs. Now, there will be a spin for automation in here because how you approach automation is different to if you're making decisions in the moment. But so much of what we discuss today will be relevant regardless of whether you have an automated strategy or not. It's for anyone who is interested in how they can up their mental game and regulate the role that emotion plays in what they do. So great to see so many of you, and I know lots of the names on here from across the spectrum of automation and manual, and that's really cool to see you all. So a little bit of housekeeping, I guess, before we start. At Betfair in Australia, the reason that we run these things is that we're customer first. Our whole business model is based on you guys doing better. And the better that you do, the better that we do. So we're coming from a very genuine place in trying to grow community and grow the effectiveness of what you do. Anytime we can help, please reach out. Our email address, automation@betfair.com.au, and I'll get Ivan to drop that down there. That comes to me and Ivan and Ben. We're always here to help. If you're not part of the Betfair Quants Slack community, it's a really cool place to engage with other like-minded people. Community-owned forum, effectively. People are wonderfully open in sharing knowledge, thoughts, experience, and just sharing the journey. So again, Ivan will drop a link. If you're watching this later on, feel free to shoot us an email and we can send you a link if you're interested. If you are in Slack, jump into the Meetups channel. There's already some chatter in there, and you can find us for any extra questions in there. Through the workshop, I was going to say the evening, we're actually doing this in the day, so it's not the evening anymore. Through the workshop, if you have questions for Jared, either drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom. You can access that anytime. Or if you're in Slack, just drop it in Meetups and I'll keep an eye on that as well. We're focusing on 3 main topics today: the role of emotions, a discussion around the difference between manual and automated mental game approaches, and managing variance, which is one of the biggest pieces for anyone who has any longevity in this space, is when's it variance and when it's a shift. We'll also have a bit of homework for you at the end. If you're coming to our second follow-up session on 12th of May, something for you to do between now and then to get the most out of this. Last bit before I introduce Jared, if you haven't had a look at Jared's work, his books are very good. The Mental Game of Poker 1 and 2, and The Mental Game of Trading. The trading one is probably most relevant in this space. really fascinating, and a lot of it really does apply to so much of what we do. So I do recommend having a look. I'm a big fan of the Audible versions. That's how I jive with books these days, but they are really worth a listen. So final thing, I do have a disclaimer I need to share here. We will be discussing the mental game and the role emotions play in your wagering activities today. But I want to just take a minute to remind everyone that gambling, both responsibly and within your means, is obviously really important. And your wagering activity should be entertainment for you and not something that causes you stress or anxiety. And if it is, please reach out and we'll help find some help. Now, onto the fun stuff. Like I said, Jared is a mental game coach, and he's got a long history in multiple industries of working with professionals to help them get better at what they do and stop their head getting in the way of their skills. So, Jared, let's, without further ado, get you on so you can start talking and I can stop. Hey, Jared, thanks for joining us. And I do have to call out, Jared's in America and it's in the middle of the night. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. Thank you very much for making us work in your schedule. I'm really excited about today. All our conversations, we're really on the same page, and I'm really keen to have this discussion. But before we jump into the role of emotions, can you just provide a bit more background to you, your journey, and where you're coming from today?
Yeah, so I came to this field really not by choice, out of necessity. I was an aspiring professional golfer, and I wanted to play at the highest levels, and basically found myself choking under extreme pressure, trying to qualify for the US Open and some other big events. Now, I was a three-time All-American in college, which meant, at least in Division III, I was in the top 20 of the country, won 9 tournaments in my 4 years there. So it wasn't like I was always choking, but to actually kind of get myself over the hump to be able to play well in those events, the traditional sports psychology material that was available helped me to play better generally, but not in those key moments. And so I decided to get a degree in counseling psychology, basically to become a therapist, but with never the intent to actually practice, but to kind of combine the skills of a therapist to kind of dig deeper into problems and then bring that with sports psychology to create my own program. So over the last 16, 17 years, I've been really refining and honing that system. It was expressed in the first poker book, and then kind of refined and upgraded in the trading book, which came out last year. But obviously, I kind of started with golfers because I knew that, then randomly met a poker player, and all of a sudden it was like, well, there's no competition. There's nobody like me in the poker industry. So I kind of had open runway. Then around 2013, traders started picking up the poker book. 2015, I started working with Team Liquid, which is one of the largest esport organizations in the world, and was head of sports psychology for them. And so now I just kind of have this system that has proven itself in multiple industries. But I will say that I have worked with many sports bettors. I currently have one of the largest horse punters in Australia as a client. He's works for CEO of Edge Stackers, if anybody knows that. And also have several other, daily fantasy based in the US, and one who made, I think, 1.2 million betting both live and pre in football, and is now kind of trying to transition into baseball as well. So I understand, the business of decision making. I understand the emotional impact that it can have on decision making, and I also understand, both within trading and sometimes within sports betting as well, right? The demands from an algorithmic standpoint, where you are creating systems and how those the origination of those systems, the actual management of those systems can be impacted by your emotions. And I know we're going to kind of get to this in this kind of difference between manual and automated strategies. But I will say at the outset, right, regardless of what industry we're talking about, whether we're talking about golf or poker or trading or esports, I work with a radiologist, I work with trial lawyers. I mean, at the end of the day, you can theoretically define every moment of our day as being a bit of performance, whether we're performing as a father, as a coach, with you all right now, in our relationships, in our jobs, right? You can slice any little environment you want and call it performance and work to better understand how to perform in those environments. The key is the quality of the feedback that you get. And this is why I like contained environments like poker and trading and esports and golf, because you get pretty good feedback. Life can be a lot messier, and sometimes the life cycles can take a very long time for you to get the feedback that you need to understand. And I know, of course, one of the challenges, in creating algorithmic betting systems, quality of the feedback in the short term, right? Quality of the data set that you're working with. So regardless of what we're working with, we need good data. And if you're working with your emotions, you're working on your mentality, right? The better you can kind of slice things up, the easier it is to get the feedback. But it does not matter what industry we're talking about. It is all the same stuff. The time periods are going to differ. The application of it's going to differ. The demands of the strategies that you'll employ to make improvements will differ, right? But we're all people first. We all have 99.99% of the same DNA. So the architecture in our brains all kind of play by the same basic rules. And if you don't understand what those rules are, then you are going to be fighting up against a system that you don't understand. And you're going to create more emotional volatility than you'd prefer. So, we're going to talk a little bit today about some of those kind of basic realities of how the brain works, about how emotions work, try to change some perspectives, bust some myths here. And I think in doing that, you'll be able to begin to kind of personalize something that can help you in your situation, regardless of what that is.
And to speak to that, like, I know that you've been very well respected within our community for a number of years. Like, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago that people started talking to me about your work. And that's well before the public work was in the trading space. It was very poker centric at the time, and it was still super applicable. And yeah, we had people across the community using, the Inchworm, the A to C analysis as part of what they did back when it was poker centric. And it's been used by so many people, even in that format. You should have seen how excited the community was when you announced your trading book and the number of pre-orders that it had.
That's awesome.
Before we'd even.
Awesome. Now I know where all the Australian orders came from.
I remember Paul Smith posting a photo of his pre-order. He's like, "This is my early birthday present to myself." And the day that it landed, like, everyone was really excited. So, like, this isn't some, random fly by night that, very much part of our community, even if you've never had anything to do with us directly.
Yeah.
But
I've always wanted to come visit, so now I have a good excuse.
Well, you let us know, and we will make it work as and when.
Yeah.
But I will agree that the application is so much wider than just your practical implementation. I know, even personally, it was a few years ago that I read the first poker book the first time, and so much of what I took out of it, I wasn't applying to anything trading related or even betting related. It was to, how I manage other people, how I take feedback, how I look for feedback. And I think, there's a very wide application of what you do, which is obviously part of why you're good at it. So, no, thank you very much for that context. It's always useful for context for anyone who doesn't understand the space. You should have seen some of our company when you said that you would come and do this. I got very excited, and they look at me with these blank faces, trying to explain why I'm so excited. The community, on the other hand, they got it. They were very happy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so.
And it's great to see such a large number of people here. I mean, I know this is the middle of the day for you all. I feel remiss if I wouldn't call out the fact that there are 2 Jareds on the call here, both spelled differently than mine. But hey, we're all kindred spirits, and that's not to say that I'm biased, but I suppose I am. And so, welcome to the 2 of you, and welcome to the other 67 of you that are here as well.
It's beautiful. It's great to see so many. Shall we talk the role of emotion? I'll hand over to you. I know you've got some things to share.
Yeah. I mean, I thought there's kind of 2 things I want to cover. First is, I'm just going to share this. there's just, again, kind of some basic principles that I just think are kind of essential. If you don't know it, you're going to cause yourself a lot of problems. I suppose many of those that are familiar with the material will know this already, but basically, Yerkes-Dodson law, I call it the performance stress curve, just to make things a little bit easier. This thing was around since 1908, and it basically just describes the relationship between performance and emotion, right? So arousal, stress, just old terms for emotion. We can add in energy, intensity, pick names for what that is. But I'm calling out this specifically because when we look at the role of emotions, we have to first understand that emotions are beneficial, including emotions like anger and fear, because some of you are actually motivated by those emotions. And so when you are beginning this process, I make this mistake, but I think it's actually advantageous to put more of an emphasis on what it is like when you are in an optimal state, right? It's so easy to focus on our weaknesses, focus on our mistakes, and ruminate around them. And that is all well and good. It's, again, where I put a lot of my emphasis in my coaching and my work, because I think that's the hardest thing for people generally to be able to kind of crack through and make some tangible improvements on. But to define your best, to really just start taking notes on a daily basis when you experience it or when you are not, and then that kind of helps you to better understand what it's like when you're at your best. I am not exaggerating. You can actually solve some of your problems by just encouraging yourself to be at your best more often. I mean, so it's not going to solve everything, but I think if we can start to look instead at emotion as being bad, number one. Two, what is the formula? What is the mixture? What is the situational, the situations in which you are at your best? And what are the qualities that show up mentally, emotionally, physically? What are the factors that help to play into that? Because if you can find yourself at the top of this curve, which is this balance where there is enough emotion powering your mind to be at its best, not too little so that you actually suck because you're bored, you're disinterested, you're tired, or you perform poorly because now the emotions have kind of risen too high. Experts that have been successful at any field, they've become masters of their own kind of emotional cocktail, right? The Michael Jordans of the world, the Rafa Nadals of the world, they're not in a static state ever, but they understand how to contain themselves. They understand how to prepare themselves to be at their best more often. So I think first and foremost, when we're talking about the role of emotions, is to do this. Now, so I'm just going to add this as a second task because I can. So yeah, I would encourage all of you to take the next 2 weeks and write down in more granular detail what things are like when you're at your best. And you can pick it around when you're at your best with regards to creating your systems, when it comes to doing your back testing, right? Even though they may feel mundane at times and there may be, kind of ebbs and flows in terms of interest, in terms of difficulty, right? You can still find those pockets where you are at your best and better understand what the heck is happening and why at that time you are versus at others. Okay. So yeah, let's just add that as a second task for the next 2 weeks. So,
and there are lots of elements to that too, right, Jared? So like recently I'm talking to one of my team and talking about how much he enjoys working with customers individually. And it's not just that individual interaction, but that then gives him that sort of that burst of energy and enthusiasm and motivation that then ups his engagement in everything else that he does. And, there's that flow on and starting to acknowledge that what you do in one space, it's not just when you're in that task that it's relevant, right? It has flow on to all the other things that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are some people out there right now who they'll be better after they have a losing week. There are others that will be worse. There will be others that will be better when they feel a little bit of the kind of back up against the wall. The procrastination kind of reaches a crescendo and now they have to do it, right? And so we're not going to criticize what that mixture is right now. We're just going to understand it. And yeah, you can eventually change it. But if you're not aware of what those factors are, if you're not aware of what those emotions are, then you're kind of gambling with your own performance, right? And again, we're going to talk a bit more about the kind of the downside of it and when emotions get excessive and cause problems. But you can actually break out of some of those patterns where fear may affect you and anger may affect you and overconfidence may affect you and lack of confidence. So yeah, primary task here. So let's go to the second bits about emotion. So emotion can fuel us at our best. And then as the Yerkes-Dodson law can show, it can also fuel our own demise. And there are two reasons that occurs. And they're both things that you need to kind of burn into your brain. So number one, right, emotional control is a mental process. And so that part of the brain has a limited amount at any one time. So AT&T did this research back in the 1930s, 1940s, when they were releasing like the phone, and they figured out that on average, people had short-term memory of about 7 pieces of information, average between 5 and 9. So that's why a phone number, at least when it was first originated, was 7 digits. Now, if you are trying to control your emotions, as that, let's say we go back to this curve here, as you kind of slip down the right side of this curve, and you're kind of in this zone here where it's like 60 or 70, you're now relying on a piece of your brain to control your emotions, which means that you're giving up thought and consideration on something that would be present when you're at your best. So that means, by definition, you have to make worse decisions than you would in an optimal state. Now, how big is that delta? How big is that gap? Depends on the person. For some, it's going to be a lot larger than others. But for some, it may just be, okay, well, when I'm at my best, I'm not accessing intuition. So that sort of next level iterations that I might be able to make in terms of how I'm evaluating my algorithm or my system is gone, when I get down to this spot here. So yeah, it's not that consequential, but for some of you, your decision-making process can degrade quite significantly. So removing that piece is essential, right? We need to better understand the cause of those emotions so that you can target them more pragmatically and practically, so that in those moments, you're fighting in a way that's actually going to reduce your emotions before they get too hot. And the second point is the other one, which is that when those emotions get too high, when you get into that 70, 80, 90 range, your ability to control your emotions goes down significantly, A. B, you by default are going to be reverting back to some very basic ways of thinking. And so by definition, you have to be making even worse mistakes, right? Kind of farther down that Yerkes-Dodson law. So if emotions aren't bad, then we're really kind of after what are the causes of them? And that is kind of a perspective that many people kind of lose, which is that those excessive emotions are caused by underlying flaws and biases and illusions and wishes that kind of run in the background of your mind. And so those flaws could be hindsight bias or confirmation bias. They could be high expectations of perfection. It could be the wish that you could make easy money, that you could create the perfect algorithm. And so when those flaws, illusions, biases come into reality, conflict with reality, right? There's some losses that are accumulating. There's some mistakes that have been made. The algorithm has broken in some way, and so there's frustration that that's happened, right? And so it's the sort of collision of those biases with reality, the outcropping of that. What comes out of that is the emotion, right? Whether it be anger or fear or lack of confidence, loss of motivation, whatever it is. And so we can use those moments where those emotions get spiked as a point of reflection, and just take a step back and ask yourself, why am I reacting that way? If you start asking that why question, your ability to start to debug your own kind of internal wiring dramatically changes. And again, for those that are kind of deep in the system, I would say that this is the thing that is probably the most commonly missed, right? If I were to rewrite the poker book in the way that I did with the trading book, it would be to further emphasize the importance of doing what I call a mental hand history. And I'm not going to go into it in detail now because it's a bit more for the conversation, but that second step of that process to really dig into your own mind is just very simply asking, why do I feel this way? Why am I reacting that way? And if you ask that question, you may not get answers right away, and that's okay. That's very common. But if you begin to write down just some notes and brainstorm and just start thinking differently about what's happening, because it's just so easy to get critical, especially, when you're in that, let me pop this back up here. When you're in this zone right here, kind of 75 to 80, this is actually the spot that is almost the worst for many people. And it's because at that stage, you will be aware that what you're doing is wrong. You'll be aware of what you ought to be thinking and doing, right? Let's say you're releasing a new algo or a new strategy prematurely. You shouldn't, but you feel desperate to make back money that you're losing. And you can't kind of help yourself but do that. Right? How many of us have gone to the cupboard and grabbed food after dinner knowing that you're not actually hungry? You're just kind of going through the motions, right? And you know that you shouldn't do it, and yet you still do. So why does that happen? It happens because there's enough emotional paralysis in the mind that is compromising our ability to translate our thoughts into action. And that state is so difficult for people to comprehend. But if you stop kind of criticizing that, which is very easy to do, stop getting pissed off at yourself or getting down on yourself or creating fear or anxiety that is occurring, and understand that it's just emotion and it's just gotten excessive. And you just need to take a step back and ask yourself, why am I reacting this way? Why am I in this situation? And if you start asking that question, you kind of plant the seeds of being able to do something different.
It's treating the emotion as the symptom instead of the problem, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The emotion itself, as you said, without emotion, we wouldn't have the skills, the edges that we have. That those wouldn't exist, and therefore it's not the problem. The problem is whatever is causing not just excess emotion, but the bit of emotion that we might not serve us in that moment, right? And then working back to what's triggered that, and then that allows you to, the same way with when you're looking at a strategy, what are you looking at in the market? What's the trigger for? It's just using your brain the same way, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're just trying to debug a system. I mean, that's for data scientists, that ought to be quite nice as a heuristic to think about. The difference, right, is that this data is kind of locked here, right? You're trying to extract data out of different betting markets and trying to find a way to develop an edge, right? So in kind of extracting the information out of your own mind to better understand where it fails and where it thrives, we've got to use the information that comes to us in the most pragmatic way. So you're really analyzing your thoughts and your emotional reactions and the triggers, right? The situations that are causing that, the behaviors, the actions, the mistakes that follow, the changes in your perception. And again, I mean, it does not matter, right, when this occurs, right? It can happen when the system is live and you're having reactions, right? Start mapping them, because those emotional, the flaws that are kind of behind those emotional reactions, they are still present when you are back testing and doing work to upgrade your system. You may not have the same emotional reactions, but if you have, I mean, I think the hindsight bias is probably one of the most fearsome. If you have the hindsight bias and you feel that popping up at a time where it doesn't necessarily matter theoretically, right, for when you're actually creating your system, it doesn't matter, because when you're creating the system, the hindsight bias is running in the background. So identifying it at any point is awesome, right? And if it shows up elsewhere in your life, you can still kind of contain it, but it may be one of the things that you're looking to actually debug.
I guess that's a really good segue into one of the things I'm really keen to discuss, which is a lot of your work focuses on how you manage live decisions. You know, that poker players, even the trading work, it is very much those who are sitting there and going, you know, do I make this decision? Do I make this decision at that point in time? And the role that emotion can play there. Now, obviously, that still applies to those who aren't making the live trading decision. They're deciding when to turn on a new bot, when to turn off a bot, when to stake up, stake down, what, you know, as you said, which biases come into play where. But I think it's probably more challenging to see how that plays out for someone who is particularly automated instead of making the decisions live. Do you have a take on the differences and similarities and how you can take some of your systems and approach them as someone who might be making those judgment calls at slightly different phases within a cycle?
I mean, I think it's very easy to sort of change the way we're even thinking about this, because the moments of execution, right? The moments of decision making, that's what we're talking about, right? I mean, I think it's interesting to even use the word like kind of live. Like, what does that even mean? I think everything is live, right? So you know, because you have more time, right? Because you get to decide when the game starts. So yes, if you're a poker player, if you're a trader, right? Markets are open. You have to be making decisions because the market is kind of dictating it for you. Obviously, in some ways, that is true in betting markets, but in terms of your interfacing with it, you do get a lot more choice around that. So, but the fundamental reality is that whenever you are making like fundamental decisions that will impact your bottom line, that is when it's kind of game on for you. And so whether that takes place over weeks or hours does not necessarily really matter, right? So you're still going to be looking for those moments where the emotions are beginning to kind of compromise you. And so it can be harder in that space because you're not confronted with an environment that is kind of forcing you. And so that is going to create maybe smaller emotional reactions, which I think is why, you know, I want to get you focused on what it's like when you're in an optimal state. And you can define, you know, an optimal state based on different kind of workflows for you, right? Different time periods, whether it's a back testing, what is an optimal mind for back testing, what is an optimal mind for researching or for you know, systematizing. But the bottom line is, like, when you see that departure from an optimal state, that's when you want to have the light bulb go on and begin to really kind of microscopically look at what's going on. So I think it is I think it is more difficult for sure, but the point is, like, it's you're always performing, you're always kind of on, it's always live.
I think the two things I'd call out from God knows how many sort of hundreds of conversations on the topic, I think one of the challenges for people who don't have the live market to respond to is that time pressure comes off to some extent. And at one level, that's good. But at another level, I've seen a lot of people who end up paralyzed by that. Got a lot of people who are really risk averse for whatever set of fundamental reasons. As you said, you know, there are a lot of things that cause that. But that because there isn't that same, you know, motivation pressure, time pressure to click go, they end up continually tweaking, refining, improving, and never clicking go. I think it can actually, they can end up in this state of paralysis because they could just keep improving. I think that's one thing to call out, and I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that. But then the other one that I think we don't necessarily discuss, there's sort of this expectation that because bots, automations run on their own, that they don't impact you, that the transactions that they're making don't impact you. And I know that you talk about this in your trading work in terms of how much you look at P&L. I think that is very relevant to this space because I've watched people who have different flows with how they monitor their live systems. Those who will watch every trade, those who will watch through the day and monitor, those who have set times that they'll check in on things. And all of that is because for all of them, to a lesser or greater extent, money is money. And even for entertainment, money is money. And it does impact your emotions. And as we said, variance is relevant. And if you've got an up curve, it builds up. If you've got a down curve, it builds up. But I do wonder whether for those who are automated, it might even build up more than for those who are manual, because, when you're there and you've got different steps that you can make decisions for the right or wrong reasons or in the right or wrong way. But for someone who's automated, they might only change a system once a week, once a month, once a quarter. And that gives a lot more opportunities for pent up emotion, positive or negative, that could then spill over in different ways. Do you have any sort of take on how to manage for that? But also, as you've said, built up emotion can have unintended consequences. Any take on that?
Yeah. So there's the what to do about that buildup, and how do you resolve it and prevent it from spilling over into causing some poor decisions. The good thing about them getting big is that it's actually sometimes easier to understand the underlying flaws, right? When they're small, it can be hard to really understand. Like they're in some respects, for many of you, like kind of imperceptible. It's just very hard to get a sense of. So when emotions get big, don't get critical. Ask why. Be introspective. Try to dig in and understand and take advantage of the opportunity. What I would say though is that if that like buildup of emotion, right? I call it accumulated emotion because it does just kind of build up and build up and build up. The ways of releasing that, you have to be much more pragmatic and practical about it. You can't just let it continue to kind of rise. So daily cool downs, journaling, writing is the most simple way to get that stuff out of your head. Number one. Number two, when you actually do go through the mental hand history process, which I talk about in the books and maybe I will have to get to today, just since I keep mentioning it, is also another tool to kind of grind through the emotion, right? We want to create a release, but the release comes after there's greater understanding. You don't want to just go off and kind of blow off that steam. You want to be able to use the data, as I've said before, to better understand what the heck is happening and generate new insight, right? We don't want to just, dump out the water and then stick it back under a leaky faucet. It's just going to fill back up again. We want to eventually be able to turn, that faucet off. And so to do that, you have to better understand the problem. So yeah, let's just go through the mental hand history process.
It's something we definitely talk about a lot within the community. People share bits of their journals, bits of their own flows, who've been inspired by some of what you do. And I think people are definitely keen on what that looks like. Yeah, from your perspective.
I'm just gonna pull it up because I wasn't expecting to go there.
Sorry, jumping into the tough questions.
Yeah, no worries. There we go. Okay, and I'll send this document over so that
thank you.
Provide as a download for everybody. And so, yeah, so I mean, this is not complicated in kind of theory, but in kind of going through it, there's definitely some spots where people tend to get stuck. So step number one is describe the problem in detail. Now, if you're doing that kind of data collection around those scenarios where your emotions are rising, or we use some of the examples that you've given, right? So let's just say the paralysis around actually turning a system on. Okay. So the second step, explain why it makes logical sense that you have this problem or why you think, feel, or react like it. That is a bit of what I was kind of alluding to before, right? The asking why is essential, right? And then once you get a good answer for that, you can figure out why that logic is flawed, right? So many people feel like their emotional reactions are illogical. They don't make any sense. They're stupid. But that is not true because you're all on this call right now and not, in a psychiatric facility dealing with schizophrenia. So your reactions are based off of an underlying flaw. And so in order to figure out what that is, you need to understand the rationale for why it is that that's happening. So why does it make sense that there's this paralysis? Well, it's because I am really scared that if I turn it on, that I'm going to lose money, and I can't lose because I've never really been good at losing, period. At any point in my life, in fact, I hate it. The money is material to me, and this is a side gig, and the stress, I just can't handle the stress. So if that actually is your answer, I might actually truthfully make that more of step one, because there's a lot of emotional detail in there. We want to try to get answers in step two that start to remove some of that emotional qualification or descriptions. And so, step two then might be something like, growing up, I hated to lose, right? Every game that I played, I was the one sort of storming off, and, I'm super competitive, and I care a lot. And so on the surface, right, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? I think I would much prefer somebody who's entering a competitive space to be a competitor and to not like to lose than to be somebody that was just kind of acquiescing and kind of weak in that regard. However, if we get to step three here and we ask like, okay, what is the flaw there? The flaw is that if you're entering a competitive environment, like losing is guaranteed, right? There's no sort of perfection here. And so there's that. There may be some expectations of perfection that are there as well. Expectations of, or some false perceptions around what mistakes may be. So even the losing may be somewhat self-inflicted. And so, yes, you hate to lose, but you really hate losing when you're making mistakes. And so then, there's some hatred of mistakes in there. There can be lots of these things. And, in the poker book and the trading book, those books are really designed to help you to answer step three of the mental hand history. There's 30 to 40, flaws or biases or wishes that are discussed in those books. And so, kind of getting through here gives you that context of what those emotions are. And then step four and step five are now we get to come up with the correction. So most people, when they are trying to battle their emotions, right, and the emotional control kind of perspective, here's the problem and here's the correction. And they're just kind of doing battle here. But the mental hand history says, all right, here's the problem, which is a symptom. So let's dig down into understanding the root, and then let's devise a correction that is injected deep into that. And over time that gets corrected, and then the reaction goes away. So that sort of changes the game. It's maybe more of a ninja style way of problem solving, where you're not dealing with the problem head on. You're a little Bruce Lee kind of water, like finding an advantage where you can kind of take the fight deeper and have some material change. So mental hand history is something you can do on a daily basis to actually help to release and get rid of some of that emotion.
Also works for those who are hyper rational or analytical in what they do, where they'll often play down the role of emotion in what they do, and talking emotions is a little bit weird, and and this, I think, particularly that explain why this is logical, why does it make sense, helps to move past that element where people can be defensive or this is just stupid, and just takes it into more of a pragmatic conversation. Well, why does this make sense? Well, why doesn't this make sense? It's interesting how many versions of that exact conversation I've had with people over the years, where you do work through, for example, the not turning something on till it's perfect. You go, well, why does that make sense? Obviously, we don't like, as you said, you don't want to make intentional mistakes, avoidable mistakes. I'm analytical, I can always improve, this can always get better. Well, why is that flawed? Because you can always get better, therefore you're never going to turn anything on. You don't know what biases are in your model until it goes live in the market. The best way of learning is by doing, et cetera, et cetera. And just how often the conversation goes in a flow that's like that. I think it really speaks to all of the people here.
And I would throw in there perfection where. I mean, right, there are American Idol contestants maybe, I don't know, do you have an Australian Idol?
Yes.
Yeah,
Used to.
Australian Idol contestants who are perfect in their own house. And if that's okay with them, then that is their choice, right? But if you've decided to create a system that you want in the market, then you can't figure out what perfection is from the sidelines. You can't win championships in any sport from the sidelines. So perfection is cool, right? I mean, there's lots of golfers who are some of the best golfers on the planet on the driving range. If that's where you want to be successful, more power to you. If you want to win championships, then you have to bring it into that environment.
I like that. I like that context. I guess that leads in well to one of the things that is most one of the biggest times that emotion plays in for particularly automated people, but across the gamut, is how do you deal with variance? And it's exactly the same in the trading space, but also how do you approach changes to your staking? So be that increasing staking or decreasing staking, being responsive but not reactive, and not overplaying any of that, being appropriate in what you do, because especially with an automated strategy, sometimes it's just variance and you got to suck it up if you want to leave something on. But sometimes actually your model's wrong, your model's changed, the market's changed, and you do need to respond to that. And how to draw the line between those two, particularly because when money is involved and pride is involved, people can get emotional and attached to strategies. So what's your take on that? Because it's definitely one of the most, not necessarily controversial, because it's not that people have like this and this, it's just no one has a good answer to it. Everyone has their own take, and still I don't think there's a perfect solution that I've seen. So I would love your take on it.
No, and there can't be a perfect solution for it because there's too much gray area. That's what variance does. That's why there's so much opportunity in these games, right? Whether it be poker, trading, or in betting, right? It's like that there is an unsolvable space, and that's really exciting. So no, you're not going to have perfect data in the short term. So, but what we're looking for is the convergence of that, and the more feedback that you can get that'll help you to kind of parse through what's going on, the better. So the advantage of being in an optimal state more frequently is that your sensation, right, your intuition gets to be more primed. And so the reactions that you're going to have to negative variance, if you are coming to it from a space where you are, kind of more intuitive and more in tune with the betting markets and with your algo and your system, right, you're going to have a better reaction that is going to be more instructive or illustrative of what to do next. Will it be 100% accurate? We don't know, but it will be more accurate than if you're coming to it with some inherent emotional reactions and flaws and biases, et cetera, kind of running the show here on some percentage, right? So again, the advantage of being in an optimal state more often, is very helpful for you. So if we're trying to kind of modulate our ability to know how we are performing, there's another tool, right? And this is kind of the primary homework that we discussed, called the A to C game analysis. And I think one of our friends here has been so kind to share his. So
shout out to Paul Smith, who's one of our pillars of our community. When I asked him for this, I said, "Do you mind doing one?" And he's like, "Oh, I did it already. Here's one I did some months ago." So this isn't one just done for this. This is genuine. So thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you a bit of feedback, which is maybe a bit of thank you for you being the guinea pig here. So this is very well done, first off. But what you basically see, right, is the description of A game, the description of B game, which would be sort of an average mentality, and then C game, which would be you at your worst. So we've got 3 buckets here. You can do more than that, but you need to do a minimum of 3. Okay, very easily for people to get their A game and C game, but that doesn't really help you to catch the sort of degradation of your mind, the decline of your mind in certain moments, especially when, negative variance is at play, or I think almost more important at times, when positive variance is at play and there's overconfidence that has emerged and there is degradation that's not getting punished. And so you're going to get punished at some point. So yeah, identifying B game is really, really important. And again, Paul, I think you've done a phenomenal job here. The question that I posed back to Kerrin as I was kind of looking at this, because I understood kind of everything that was here. And so just to kind of finish the instruction here, sorry. So it's divided kind of mental game and then tactical. So you can see kind of mentally, we've got ideas in the A game, like relaxed and confident, thorough in analysis. B game, right now, we begin to kind of recognize some impatience, wanting to implement now. C game, distracted by other things, putting off looking at data, negative self-talk. So you can see there's very clear delineation between those 3 points from a mental standpoint. And then if you look at the tactical, same concept here. A game, working on data analysis from every angle systematically. B game, worrying about Betfair commission rather than profit, rushing the systems with some analysis, but not thinking about the right time to put them in. C game, not enough history or analysis to justify a new model, not adding new data or sports. So very clear delineation. It doesn't have to have, like the delineation from A game, B game, C game is more important to get right than from tactical to mental. But what we found from Paul, which is the bit of feedback that I'm going to give him, is a very common one. That when you are kind of forced to explain in more granular detail kind of why you are classifying this as B game or C game, or what this is really reflecting, when you get into C game, all of this tactical stuff is caused by your emotions, caused by the mental side. Okay, you do not make very poor judgments unless there's something emotional at play. And so on the flip side, everything that is sort of in your A game tactically is evidence of an emotional state that is optimal. And so there's sort of nothing wrong mentally. And if you were to make mistakes, if there was something off while you're in your A game, then you know that it's kind of purely technical. Here in your C game, it might have a little bit of a technical component to it, but if you correct all of the emotional stuff, it becomes very, very hard for you to make these C game errors. And so when we look at it from this, it's almost like there's like kind of like an X in terms of your point of focus, and that X gets firmly embedded in B game. So B game is where you are kind of most actively working to correct your mentality, because that by definition means you're preventing C game and gives you an opportunity to get into A game. So Paul, my point of feedback for you is that you mentioned in the reply to Kerrin about what this meant, right? I kind of asked, I didn't understand quite, like, not enough history or analysis to justify a new model, right? And so your description was that, if I put a model into live betting when I know I haven't spent enough time collecting data, for example, going live with only 3 months versus much longer, then I've rushed through my process and have ignored rules. And then the kind of yada yada at the end was, well, it must be because of overconfidence. And yet we look up here and the overconfidence isn't listed. So, there's an iterative process to creating these things. And so, what my advice for those that have not completed it, give yourself a solid 2 weeks, right, until the next session to just create a draft. Then it's going to take you another solid 2 weeks to really, maybe even longer, to prove that what you've created is solid. But once you have something solid, you've created an independent metric by which you can evaluate yourself. And if you have an independent metric that you can evaluate yourself, now you've taken some of the gray out of having to manage and deal with variance. And yes, there's going to be still a lot of gray area there. But if you can control for one factor, then, I mean, that's a gift. So
I really love that. And my one thing to add to that would be anyone who needs accountability on that, because in this space, accountability is something that I hear from a lot of people they need. How big is it of Paul to share that? But he's also shared similar things in the past in the quants group. Guys, if you're looking for accountability background the next couple of weeks before our next workshop, you will get so much more out of the next one if you do this. And my challenge to you, if you want to accept it, is to share your draft within the community between now and then. Because how much more will you get out of it if it's not just you looking at your own thing, but you're sharing with other people? Maybe we can all bounce some feedback between now and then, because then we'll come into the next one really turned on. And if we don't want this as a nice thing that we listen to in the background and then no one ever thinks about again, and we actually want it to make some real change, I think that's how we're going to get it.
Love it. Great idea.
Go team. I think in terms of looking at variance particularly, like I think that is really healthy to be able to identify where you're coming from. And are you at a point where you're on a rush, are you on tilt? Are you, just so excited that you're doing things for a set of reasons that aren't just rational? But also, are you being too hyper rational, because then you might be doing things for another set of reasons that aren't right either. So in summary, your response back to when do you do it is whenever you're in the space where you're at your A game, right? And if you're not at your A game, you shouldn't be touching it. Is that fair?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think there are some that are probably, well, yeah, because there are some of the, I'm assuming here, that are more advanced. And so the decision making in your B game can still be good enough to be profitable and still have enough edge and still, but if you are more risk averse, I would say that pushing yourself to be a bit more risky in B game with control around, right? We're still going to keep this in an entertainment standpoint, right? Controlling the losses, controlling kind of the financial risk. Yeah, there's some data, right? I mean, just put yourself out there. Like, one of the worst things about the risk aversion and the perfectionism and the paralysis that exists on the sidelines is that you just stop collecting information, and there's just no other way. So I think sometimes you can be very, very powerful to be in B game, and it can be too perfectionistic to only rely on A game. Once you get kind of farther along, right, then you can make clear decisions. And if it's just not your day, you can turn the thing off and come back when you're in a better state of mind and look at it with fresh and clean eyes. And I certainly can attest to that as I'm was writing the book. I mean, there were days where I thought what I was writing was literally, I could not imagine a single person on the planet not buying it because it's the best thing ever. And then I wake up the next morning and read it, and I'm like, what? It's fine. It's fine. I mean, it's okay. There's some work to do. It's like, so what was going on in that? Well, clearly I was excited because I was generating new insight, and there was something about what I was coming to that was real and genuine and was impactful. But it was clearly excessive in my interpretation and my perception of what I actually had. And so I needed to come back with fresh eyes to understand that, no, dude, you were actually in your C game at that moment, and not thinking with clear eyes. So again, I think the ability to kind of step back and step away is really cool for you all. You're not forced to be there when you're not in an optimal state, but you certainly can be if the data gathering is necessary.
I think the other thing on that, two things. One, we're very fortunate that we can turn models on with very, very small stakes, and you can bet a few cents at a time. And even just that, the data analysis from that, like you said, data is gold, and that's really valuable.
Cool.
I think the other thing on it is, I guess, to build on, sharing your own A to C analysis. We are so fortunate to have a community around us, and you can share these things. And sometimes when you're considering, and I've watched people do this, and like, is this the time to stake up, or is this the time to, how should I manage this? sometimes just justifying your logic to someone else can clarify it for yourself, and can bring you to the right place. Ben's shared a copy of the A to C template in the chat. If you're watching this later as a recording, shoot us an email, automation@fair.com.au, and we'll send you a link. We'll also upload it to Slack, so anyone who wants it there can get it, and Jared's shared something too.
I just hear the mental hand history. Look at that.
Thank you. Beautiful. So we'll be back in 2 weeks on the 12th. Now, one thing I have to apologize for, we're going to have to do a time change from midday to 11 a.m. for the next one. I will take culpability for time zones getting the better of me.
It's so hard.
It drives me nuts, even with work.
Especially because we had a time change in all of this too. So
both of us. So it's all good, but we will be moving the next one back an hour, and Ben will email you about that separately. But we didn't want to confuse you ahead of today, which is why we didn't. But really hope to see you guys back here in 2 weeks. If you have any extra feedback or thoughts for Jared and me between now and then, please share them, because the whole point of this is that you get value out of it, and that it'll help you with where to next, and how you want to structure how you think and how you work going forward. So our focus next time will be taking the conversation from variance to managing bankroll and staking strategies, a bit more conversation there. We'll review our A to C history. We'll talk about how the role that your mental game plays changes through your journey. And we had a really good question today that I'm holding for that one. It's about how do you not slip back into bad habits, and how does that change across that journey? And we'll have a conversation about when do you know that actually this isn't for you, and what you're doing isn't actually a healthy balance with the rest of your life. Because sometimes that's a hard conversation, but one that you need to have. So that's our focus in the next one. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to add, Jared?
No, I just think, like anything, you've got to do the work. And I see, kind of Craig's question comment here, like, how do I stay being good? The good sort of new me that has been, it's that there's a continual evolution to this work. I mean, it's a mental game, not a mindset, not a something that is static. There's a necessity to be continually identifying what is your current C game. So maybe you eliminated your old one, and bravo to you, but you got a new one, and you got to deal with it. And
what's next?
So, yeah, what's next? I mean, that's almost kind of one of the biggest challenges of this, is that kind of once you get started, the ignorance is bliss goes away. You get kind of plucked out of the matrix, and you've got to deal with reality. And yeah, it sucks sometimes. But I would say that I would much prefer to have to deal with reality and to learn how to deal with it better than to be basically condemned to a life of unconscious reactions that you have no control of. Or C game. I mean, it's like you're just sort of reacting without really any comprehension as to why. So yeah, I think to understand that this is an evolution, and because it's an evolution, it means that the getting started can really feel experimental. So especially for those of you that have more paralysis, more risk aversion, right? Just give yourself a 2 to 3 week, month window of opportunity, maybe even just the next 2 weeks before we see you again, where you just treat it as an experiment. There's no downside. There's nothing on the line other than the opportunity to gather data. And if you treat things with those kind of with that kind of a perspective, it can take a lot of the emotional sting out and kind of get you over that hump to be able to just be in a position to learn something new. Because if you're learning something new today, well, that means that you get to learn something new farther into the progression sooner. So yeah, just get started. There's just no other way.
And particularly in this 2 weeks when we're all in it together. I think a bit like, anyone who's been sent off on a leadership course within, the company that they work in, you come back with all these new ideas and all this new cool stuff, and then no one else gets what you're talking about,
right.
And then it's just a bit too hard and no one does anything. The beauty here is we've got a cohort of people who are all passionate about this, all interested. We all get it. You're not on your own. And, rising tide carries all boats. Let's do this together, and maybe there can then be something that we do keep each other honest and accountable to. And when it gets to slip into your C game, you can share that, and we can help pull you back out.
Yeah, love it.
Thank you so much, Jared. That's been everything I hoped it would be. And we almost stayed to an hour. Thank you very, very much. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thank you all. I hope to talk to a lot of you before the 12th. If you haven't already registered, do, because it is a separate RSVP link. So Ben, if you could, or Ivan, if you could drop that link back in. If you haven't registered for the next one, like I said, it's at 11 instead of midday. And I really look forward to seeing you there. And my closing comment is just back to, like we said earlier, this is supposed to be fun. You are supposed to enjoy this. So please make sure that it's on the right side of that for you at this point in your life, and that you are gambling responsibly. Thank you again, and I'll talk to you later. See you guys. Bye.
Everyone.